What is puppetry? Puppetry consists of manipulating puppets for doing theatrical shows. Puppets don't move on their own, humans control them. The way you control a puppet is the most important thing. The puppet you have is just a complement for you to show your talent. What are puppets? Puppets are figures that can have any kind of form. It doesn't matter if they have human form, animal form, or any other kind of shape. As I have already said, they are often used for theatrical shows and cinema. However, there are some puppets that can be considered as toys, and children often use them to play. How do they work? For explaining how they work, I'll show you different types of puppets. The first ones I'll be showing are shadow puppets or shadow figures. These types of puppets are 2D, and they are just silhouettes that you can move because of a rod they have attached. For using them, you need a screen of fabric or paper, basically a translucent screen, and a backlight. Then I'll show you hand puppets. They consist of puppets with an empty body that allows someone to put their hand inside to control the parts of the puppet. These parts are usually the head and the arms. They mostly don't have legs because the hole that's used for introducing the hand is on the lower part of their body. They are often used for kids to play. I will now explain string puppets, which are also called marionettes. They are controlled by strings or threads that come from above. They often have a string for every important part, one to each ear, one to each hand, one to each shoulder, one to each leg, and more. But they can also have other strings for certain kind of movements. An example would be a cat marionette, which would have an extra string for moving the tail. There's no limit on how many strings should a marionette have. It all depends on its shape and on which movements you want it to have. As a curiosity, controlling a marionette is considered as something really hard to do. Last but not least, we have stop-motion puppets, which are used a lot in cinema. They can be made with lots of different materials and they can have or not have an internal structure. As an example of puppet without any structure, there are claymation characters which don't have any kind of structure but can be moved because of the flexibility of the material. However, there are other stop-motion characters that have an internal armature. This armature makes them more stable. The armature is usually made of metal and the material you use for creating the body of the puppet, the exterior part, can be any kind of flexible material, such as epoxy, latex, or clay. There are lots of other types of puppets, but if I mention them all, I will never finish, because anything can be a puppet. You can just take a spoon and put a pair of eyes on it, and it will be considered as a puppet because you can move it and do theater with it. Now I will talk about animatronics. They are basically 3D characters that are animated by an electronic mechanism. They are basically mechanized puppets. They were created to emulate an illusion of life in an inanimate object. They can be used in lots of different places, such as theatrical shows, movies, theme park attractions, museums, and more. And how do they work? Like puppets, they can also have any kind of shape. However, we can't manually control them. What makes an animatronic different from a puppet is the mechanism that's inside it. Someone programs the mechanism to move in a certain way and the mechanism does the rest of the work, so you don't necessarily need to touch the animatronic to make it move. However, there are animatronics that have some parts that can be controlled by puppeteers. Some animatronics also have sound. As an example, they can program them to move like if they were talking, and at the same time you would hear them talk because of the voice recording that is also programmed to sound at the same time. Depending on the animatronic, it can have a different size and material. What an animatronic always has are wires, gears, a plastic and steel frame to support and attach all the components. Realistic animatronics have a skin that can be made of foam rubber, silicone, urethane, etc. This material is shaped with the desired form and then painted to be more realistic.
Puppetry as a technique has been present in cinema since the very first special effects. Animatronics, on the other hand, are quite the recent invention. They were first introduced by Disney as the talking birds in the 1964 film Mary Poppins. Actually, that film has some great examples of groundbreaking visual effects, way ahead of their time. We strongly recommend you to look into it if you don't know about them. After Mary Poppins, and thanks to Disney's extensive research on the technology, animatronics became a lot more widespread, with some directors doing an immense job pushing the technique forward. Steven Spielberg is probably the most recognizable name of the bunch. He demonstrated the impactful nature of puppets and how they can be as endearing as they are terrifying. Sometimes. Examples of both would be the animatronics Shark in Jaws, the animatronic T-Rex and puppet raptors in Jurassic Park, and E.T. the Extraterrestrial from, E.T. the Extraterrestrial. This last one was a very interesting combination of effects, ranging from a hand puppet to a complex rig operated by very short suit performance, as well as having some animatronic elements of its own. But we cannot talk about puppets without mentioning one of the most prolific and crazy creators of the industry. The one, the only, Kermit the Frog.
Oh my god! Oh jeez, oh my god!
Creator, Jim Henson. This man was in love with puppets, so much that in 1982 he released his own Lord of the Rings-esque epic, The Dark Crystal, for his long-form movie to not feature a single human. He also made Labyrinth, which did feature a couple of humans and one David Bowie, but still had puppets as the majority of its cast, and, as mentioned before, The Muppet Show. In 2019, Netflix produced a prequel series for The Dark Crystal, which is a beautiful marriage of hand puppets, rod puppets, stop motion, and CGI. I cannot stop recommending the making-of documentary they made. It goes into the process of building the sets and the characters, and it's honestly some great insight into it. Check it out, after class. Anyway, Henson's best buddy, Frank Oz, who he co-directed The Dark Crystal with, and who you may know as the voice of a certain Green Jedi Master, went on to make 1986's Little Shop of Horrors, a musical starring a giant, room-sized singing carnivorous plant, which at its fullest required more than 30 puppeteers working at the same time to be brought to life. It did pay off, however. The actors said it was so lifelike they found themselves trying to talk to it between takes, and had to remind themselves that it was just a bunch of rubber. Because of their versatility, puppets were often used in places where actors couldn't get the job done, and in a world before CGI, they were all over the horror and sci-fi genres, including the aforementioned Jurassic Park and Jaws, but also Star Wars, John Carpenter's The Thing, and Terminator, to cite some examples. Finally, full-on stop-motion films do exist, with Leica being one of the most famous modern studios dedicated to them, but they belong in the world of animation, not special effects, the same way a fully CG film would. Speaking of CGI, the advancements made in computer graphics have allowed them to be more prominent in films in last years, with the use of practical effects becoming less and less common. But why did this happen? And is it the right way to go? Are puppets really worse than computer graphics?
While puppetry is one of the oldest theatrical art forms in the world, practiced by cultures all over the globe including all types of races, due to a rapid technological shift of the world at large, it has suffered a decline in appeal. Moreover, contemporary puppetry performances nowadays are defined by broad terms such as multimedia performances, crossover theater, and visual theater, because of certain stigmas such as the low status of puppetry amongst the arts, and the primary demographic of children mainly aims at. Most artists avoid referring to the word puppet specifically. Thus, the argument against puppetry comes from the widely perceived notion that puppetry is for kids. This hurts the reputation of the craft in the public's eye, as puppeteers also want to bring to people's attention that puppetry is an art that can also be enjoyed by adults, as each of the puppets are meticulously handcrafted, which is hard work that puppeteers want acknowledged and respected. The wide spectrum from kids to adult puppetry entertainment should not be condensed to kid-only spectacle due to preconceived notions. Contemporary puppetry has its fair share of criticisms. Instead of making things from scratch, clothes are acquired from second-hand shops instead of being handmade, the props are mass-produced, etc. The low budget and time pressure threatens the existence of workshops, since production can carry on without skilled professionals. In the past, puppetry used to be recognized as an isolated art form, but nowadays the mixing of other visual and acoustic elements negates the former idea. This forms a main source of complaint from puppet makers, as each of the puppets that they poured so much creative energy into are drowned out amongst all the other objects and effects present on stage. Compared to CGI, puppetry shines in its own way as a handmade, traditional method of building creatures. CGI tends to step into an uncanny valley, looking neither real nor fake enough. Puppetry, on the other hand, shows the little imperfections that come with crafting a figure by hand, which gives it a human quality. In Harry Potter, the actor that played Dumbledore, Richard Harris, thought that the animatronic phoenix named Fox was real. When explaining the importance of physical puppets, Nick Dudman from the special effects team explained that computer-generated effects do the things that we physically can't, but what we do with practical effects is create a sense of interaction that sometimes might be lost with CG. For example, in 2011, the prequel for The Thing came out, which paled comparison with the 1982 version because while the former version of the movie was originally meant to have practical effects, it was replaced by CGI, while the latter does use practical effects in the final product. Baby Yoda from The Mandalorian is an example of a creature that's mostly a puppet, but a couple of moments are filled out with CGI to make up for the things that puppets cannot do, such as climbing or walking down, though multiple puppets were made for different actions. A clean plate is shot first, then the scene is shot with the puppet. Puppeteers can use wireless controls to control the puppet offset if the puppet is fully animatronic, though if they need to move a small detail such as the hands, then they would either be on set or underneath the puppet to move unassisted.